Hello, everyone. Welcome back to I See What You're Saying, the Disciplined Listening Podcast. I'm Michael Reddington, and today it is my pleasure to welcome our next guest, Karin Hurt. Karin is the CEO of Let's Grow Leaders. She is a 5-time author, including her most recent book, Powerful Phrases for Dealing with Workplace Conflict. She is an Inc. 100 leadership speaker, host of Asking for a Friend, and married to our former guest, David Dye, who she also runs her business with and has co-authored her books with. It's a very interesting and fantastic relationship. I'm super excited to have Karin on the show with us today. She has so much great experience and so many great ideas to share. I'm really excited to get into all of them with you, including her thoughts on the problems associated with magical thinking, the importance of communicating our expectations, and the problems we run into when we don't communicate them as clearly as we thought we did. She's also going to share many of what she refers to as her GOAT statements, greatest of all time statements for dealing with workplace conflict, and also the work that has to be done before and after to make those statements so effective. And she's also going to talk about how it is so important that we continue to think of leadership, communication, and handling difficult conversations as connecting with other human beings. It's a great conversation. She packs a ton of amazing ideas into one short conversation. I'm so glad you guys are here to listen to it today. Thank you. Before we get started, I do want to make sure we thank our sponsors. As always, we have HumanTell. Please, if you haven't, head over to humantell.com. Check out all of their online training that they have available, self-paced, video-based training. It's the best in class. Look at their research while you're there, the science that backs up the training that they have, and begin to teach yourself how to identify what people are likely thinking and feeling in real time by recognizing their emotional shifts through their facial expressions and nonverbal behavior. All of that and so much more over at humantell.com. Make sure you enter the code INQUASIVE25 for 25% off the training that you choose. For the professional interviewers, please head over to certifiedinterviewer.com. That's where you can learn everything you need to know about the International Association of Interviewers. What are the requirements for membership at the individual and organizational level? You can see the online training and education that's available, the in-person training and networking events that are available, all of the interviewer resources, and so much more. That is also where you can learn more about the Certified Forensic Interviewer designation. What does it involve? What does it mean? Who qualifies? How do you earn the designation? How do you maintain it? What can it mean for your career moving forward? The science, the textbooks, everything that's behind the exam, you can find it all over at certifiedinterviewer.com. And while you're online, please head over to inquasive.com. That's where you can learn more about the customized programs our clients ask us to facilitate for their senior leaders, their sales teams, and their HR teams to teach them the strategic observation and persuasive communication skills necessary to encourage people to share sensitive information under vulnerable circumstances in the face of consequences, and then unlock the relationships and outcomes as a result. One more time, I'm so happy that you're all here. Thank you very much. And without further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce you to Karin Hurt. Good morning, Karin. It is so great to see you. I can't thank you enough for being here today. How are you?
I am good, and it's my pleasure to be here. I'm looking forward to our conversation.
I'm really excited about it. And thank you very much for sending me a copy of your book. It was a great read. Lots of highlights, lots of notes, and for me too, just trying to connect it to different conversations and different situations that I've been in. So now I'm really excited to be able to not just talk through your most recent, I mean, you've written 3, right? But your most recent book with you, but to get even further, because I know you're so active on social media and you're out there speaking and you do so much. So I think just to kind of start the conversation, the most recent book, it's right behind you for the people that are watching, Powerful Phrases for Workplace Conflict, for Dealing with Workplace Conflict, right? Did I say it right?
Yep.
What I would like to do, we're going to get into that for sure. But I think the first question that I would really like to ask is, what are some ways that leaders, managers, both unintentionally create conflict at work?
Oh, I love that question because, a lot of times we all wake up and we are trying to do a really good job. And one of the biggest ways we see is leaders are not holding people accountable. And so they think they are trying, well, if I'm just nice and they do what we call magical thinking. Well, I'm sure they know, right? Because they have a master's degree or because they've been trained or because their mama should have taught them better. So I don't address the situation. And so I think I'm not creating conflict because I'm just being nice and I'm letting us all get along. Where that creates conflict, though, is it's not setting clear expectations. And so if I have an expectation and I'm not communicating that expectation or holding you accountable to that expectation, you can't meet that expectation. And then we're going along and nothing gets better because we haven't been talking about it. And so they inevitably create a deeper, more hard to handle conflict because they have not addressed the conflict sooner because they were trying to avoid the conflict in the first place. So that's one. And then the other one that I really see is a lack of connection. And this is why. So we talk to a lot of managers who they get promoted. And somebody says, well, now that you're promoted, you certainly can't be friends with these people, which is good advice, right? There's a difference between being friendly and connected and friends, right? So the new manager starts to do all the things to ask their team about their people, pets, and projects, and they're showing up super interested in people, but they become a robot because they're afraid to disclose anything of themselves. And they create conflict because people are like, I did not trust this person. I don't know anything about them. Do they have kids? What do they do for fun? And so that's the other thing because the intention is there. They're trying to do what they think is right. But, it's really important to show up both interested and also interesting as a human being for your team. So those are two of the biggest ones I see.
Oh, those are such great examples. And I love the term, I wrote it down, magical thinking. I'm sure if you had $1 for every time you've heard somebody say, well, they should know better. They should know how to do that. They should have done that. They should have taken initiative. They should have known to. Well, you're right. They should have. But clearly they didn't because the
Right.
action didn't happen. So making that assumption, and that was a great example. Well, they have a master's degree or they have 10 years of experience or they were in the meeting, whatever. If
Right.
we didn't make it clear to them, then how can we hold them accountable? And the problems start from there. So I thought that was a great example. I love that phrase, magical thinking. And I also love kind of the juxtaposition between intention and connection. Like,
Mhm.
we can have great intentions, but yet fall so short on the connection piece that the it doesn't necessarily create conflict, but it doesn't allow for conflict to begin to resolve itself because we don't have
Yes.
that relationship or that trust in place.
Yeah.
I was facilitating an event last week and just kind of spur of the moments said something a little bit more personal that than I would normally say during a session. It wasn't inappropriate, it just kind of sort of fell out of my mouth before I knew what to do about it. So there it is, everybody. It's out in the room. But that led to somebody making a comment and somebody making a comment, and it sort of spiraled within the room. And based on the type of event it was, it ended up being a great experience, and people ended up sharing a lot of really personal things that they hadn't shared with each other as a group before. And on break, I checked in with the person who brought me there, be like, hey, that was entirely off script. That was 25 minutes we didn't plan on spending that way. I'll get us back on track. And he said, no, that was perfect. That's what we needed. I have no idea how that happened. So I kind of
Mm.
saved that. And when I came back in, I said, one of the comments we got on break was, how did that just happen? So the reason why that just happened was every time somebody shared something personal about themselves, somebody else felt motivated to do the same. Like, you found something in common. You found another experience, another perspective, something that we shared as a group that we didn't know prior to walking in here today. And every story that got shared didn't just make it easier for somebody else to share, but it caused people to feel compelled to share. So as leaders, it can be really hard to walk that friend line, especially if you've been
Yeah.
promoted from within the organization, like you've said, but finding that way to maintain that connection so we can create the opportunities to solve conflicts before they start is so critical.
Yes, absolutely. And it's interesting. I think it's so important, particularly if you're assuming that you're really different from the other person. And I know in your work, right, this is such a big thing. How do you create that common ground? And it's interesting as we go to do work globally. Inevitably, some person, either a meeting planner for the keynote or the executive for whom are coming in and say, now it's very different than in America. Our people are very different. Southeast Asia, Switzerland, very different. And yes, there are things that are different for sure. But you know what? There is so much more that is the same. Our motivations, how we care about people. We want to be seen. We want to be validated. We want to be able to have our ideas be heard. And that is culturally agnostic. And so I think, when we can start there to say, what is it that we all want, right? And what are the things that we have in common? Then the intentions, we give people more of the benefit of the doubt rather than saying, how am I going to manage this very different group of people from me? Yeah.
Yeah, the universality of the human experience is far greater than I think most people start to realize, whether it's because we're taught, we're told, we expect, we fear, whatever, but it is far greater. And that's another great point that you made right there. If we go in expecting the worst or fearing the worst, or those negative expectations start to become a self-fulfilling prophecy. And so instead of going in expecting people to be different, we can go in with that outcome focus. Here's what we're looking to achieve. And as human beings, here's what I'm pretty sure we all want. And
Yeah.
we can figure out the cultural differences and impacts as we work through the process together, which leads me to a thought. I would imagine in your work and in all the research that you've done, and I'm always scared to death that I'm going to forget the full name of the research study that led to your most
Would you
recent
want me
book.
to just say it?
There's I'm gonna try to fail first, and then we'll see. So it was the World Workplace Conflict and Collaboration Survey.
You got it.
Okay, thank you, everybody. Good night. That's my win. We're done here. But that was an in-depth survey, and I'll certainly let you talk to how broad and how deep that survey was. But I'm also willing to bet as we talk about intentions and as we talk about being nice in the old "I'll solve conflict by avoiding conflict" approach, I'm sure that in your work, you run into many examples of myths or false wisdom or kind of these old wives' tales that, this is how you resolve conflict, but in real life, it doesn't work that way.
Mm-hmm.
Have you seen some of those examples where people have been told that this is a great way to resolve conflict, but really it doesn't help at all?
Yeah. So I statements is one of them now, and we really do believe. I mean, done well, an I statement makes all the sense in the world, right? Because you are owning what you are about to say, and you are not imposing it on someone. So if you do them right, I statements are great. But where it breaks down is when people say, "Well, all I got to do is start with the word I." And therefore, I will be having a powerful phrase for dealing with workplace conflict. And it does not necessarily work. I think you're a jerk is an I statement, right? I think your thinking here is completely misguided is an I statement. And so instead, I think we talk about 4 dimensions of collaboration, and if staying focused on one of those 4 dimensions and figuring out what needs to happen there works so much better. Another is the sandwich technique for giving feedback that is a problem. And again, the intention behind the sandwich technique is noble, right? You want to be balanced in your feedback to people. But the problem is if you say, hey, so I'll give you an example. Imagine David, you've met David, my husband and co-author. Imagine he's sitting right here and I say, hey, David, I got to really thank you. You've done some incredible work on this brand new program we're doing on urgency. And I love all the research. It's really going to be powerful. He says, oh, thank you. But your leadership is derailing our company. But you're kind of hot, right? So what's the only thing he's going to take away from that, right? Either he's hot or the real negative stuff. And so we're real big believers in giving people all of the feedback and having these candid conversations, but you don't necessarily need to do it in the same sentence. And there's a time for this, which is what we call an open-faced sandwich, which is if you come to me and say, hey, Karin, you've been listening to my podcast for a while now. Do you have any feedback for me? Right. So you have come to me and asked, and I know you really want it. Well, that's a perfect time for me to say, Michael, something I really dig is you really engage with your audience and it's a conversation. And I feel like I'm just sitting in the room with you. And I love that about your podcast. And then, I could say, and one thing for the future, right? And just suggest one thing, right? Well, that is perfectly appropriate, right? But I think in conflict, a lot of times people are afraid of having the conversation, so they muddy them.
That might be the most important point for most people. The fear of I don't it might not be so much the fear of engaging in the conversation. It's the fear of an unwanted outcome. If I don't do this just right, if they don't hear me just right, I've got this employee that's worked for me for a long time. By and large, they're pretty good. I just need them to fix this. But in trying to get them to fix this, I don't want them to quit. I don't want them to hate me. I don't want them to get worse at all of these other things. So now the don't wants ended up outweighing the I want, which then muddies the whole process and creates the lack of clarity. I'm thrilled you brought up the sandwich, a personal bias and sticking point for me. And I bet you see this more than I do. I'm out on the road doing any number of events or working with any types of groups. As soon as feedback comes up, somebody like you can set your watch to it. Somebody talks about using the sandwich method. And I've immediately got to bite through both sides of my face and figure out, okay, how am I going to professionally address this today so I don't make this worse for everybody? But very happy to hear you bring that up. And I do feel like that's an example of something that's been taught with the best of intentions. And like anything else, by the way, your open face title, I love. Also took me right back to my favorite steak sandwich in New Jersey, which will have me hungry through lunch. So I appreciate that.
What is that sandwich?
Was an open face steak sandwich. There was a little
Steak.
pub I used to hang out in Clifton called the Harp Bar that had the best open face steak sandwich ever. And now that I'm talking about it out loud, I'm going full Homer Simpson here. So all I can think about is the food. But yeah, one of my favorite sandwiches ever. But well-intentioned. There's a time and place for it when it's done executed, but people take that one technique and they overuse it and unfortunately use it incorrectly. So one of the things that I love about your book, well, I could say over the 300 things that I love about your book because of the over 300 phrases that are in it. But even within that, you've got the goats, the ones that you and David really look at as being the most powerful. My phrase is here, but you look at being the most powerful or the widely applicable or the ones that can have the biggest impact in different conversations. So because I'm a bit of a betting man, I'll bet that your favorites of the 300 are likely among the goats. So if we're going to start transitioning away from some of the myths, the false wisdom, and into some of the things that really do work, what are some of your favorite statements to help people navigate solving conflict within the workplace?
Yeah, so we talk about 4 dimensions of collaboration or productive conflict. And so we have a couple of goats for each one of those. So it starts with connection. Are we connected as human beings? And this is so important at 2 levels, right? Are we connected before we even are trying to have a conversation? Do I know you? Do I trust you? And are we creating a connection and a common ground in the conversation? So a couple of goats. One of my favorites is, I really care about. And then you insert the thing that you really care about. I really care about you. I really care about our relationship. I really care about this project. I care about our customers. I care about our work together. The key is to say something you really care about, because if you say this disingenuously, you've lost them right at the beginning. So I really care about this, and I'm confident we can find a solution we can work with here. And when you start that way, it immediately de-escalates if there's emotion involved. If you say it with sincere face, good body language, and have a reputation of really caring about the thing that you say you care about, right? So another one, which I know you love, is tell me more. And, and this one, as people are coming and especially if they're really fired up and the first thing you say is, oh, wow, can you tell me more about that? The reason we get louder, either physically or metaphorically in conversations, is we're not feeling hurt. So if you say, tell me more, it immediately says, okay, I'm being heard, and this person really wants to hear about me. So those are some connection goats. Clarity is the next dimension. And this is, do we have a shared understanding of success? And my favorite goat is, what would a successful outcome do for you? So we all say, oh, what does success look like? That's like project management 101. What does success look like here? But when you say, what would a successful outcome do for you? You're going a level deeper into motivation. So imagine that you and I are working on a project together, And we know what success looks like, but then we say, hey, what would a successful outcome do for you? And I say to you, you know what? I've really been trying to get my boss to understand that I am good at this stuff. So when we do a presentation, can I have the microphone for a minute so I can really show how that I'm really deeply involved in this work? And you may say, I have been on the road the last couple of weeks, and I would really like to get home at 5 o'clock on Friday to spend some time with my kid. Okay, well, now we are not only working for our major outcome, all that unspoken conflict of, hey, why isn't he giving me the microphone? And hey, why is she taking so long with this stuff? So I'm going to end up having to work this weekend. All that unspoken conflict becomes visible. And so we can have that conversation. So those are connection, clarity, curiosity is the next dimension. And are we genuinely interested in one another's perspectives and alternative ways and approaches? And so, these curiosity goats are all things that are getting, out creative ways of thinking. So, well, what do you think we should do next? What would your approach be here? So, inviting some curiosity into the conversation, and all of the curiosity ones are all about that. And then commitment is where do we have a shared agreement? And, what's one next step we can agree on? Okay, so we've agreed to this one we call the schedule to finish. And, so we've agreed to this as our outcome. So why don't we schedule some time 3 weeks from now and see how our solution is working? Let's just go put it on our calendar. By scheduling the finish and putting it on the calendar, if we don't keep our commitments to one another, neither one of us has to gain the courage to resurface the conversation. We've already scheduled time to do it. If we do what we said we're going to do, we don't have to remember to celebrate that. We've already scheduled time to do that. And if we're both looking at the calendar, knowing that this is something that a conversation we're going to have again, we're probably a little bit more likely to be focused on doing what we said we're going to do. So that's a quick overview of some of the goats.
A quick overview of 300 pages, or not 300 pages, but 300 different phrases and the commonalities behind it. I love all of that. And to try to work backwards, scheduling the finish, as you said, I feel like another benefit of that, as I try to think and talk at the same time, is that it takes away from the fear of micromanaging. So I feel like in the world of conflict, a lot of times I'm being nice or I'm avoiding dealing with somebody because I don't want Karen to feel like I'm micromanaging her.
Mhm.
Well, if I'm saying, Karen, where are you on this? Karen, have you done this? Karen, did you do that? Karen, can you get me this? Karen, have you done what you said you would do? That's micromanaging. But if we say, hey, we all agree that this is going to get done and we think it needs to get done by the 25th, so let's all get together on the 17th to make sure we're on pace. Now we're just double checking the schedule. I'm not micromanaging anybody. We're just sitting down to check where we are up against the plan. So by having that scheduled, now we're able to get past the micromanagement, hold people accountable, keep the conversation going, everything that you said. So I really like that.
Yeah, it also avoids magical thinking, right? So if we schedule the finish, now we have a clear time that we've agreed on, as opposed to, you should know how important and urgent this is.
Yeah.
Right? I just had this situation. I mean, we teach this stuff, right? And I just like, why has nobody on the team given me feedback on the thing that I said 1 week ago today? I said, this is really important. And I sat there and I looked and I said, did I schedule the finish? I told him it was really important, but so are a lot of other things that I have people working on, right? So if I had said I really need this done by Thursday at 3 o'clock, I have a good team. They would have done it.
And just that moment of introspection right there is so important, is how many leaders would just blame it on the other person and move on with their day. It's one more email in their inbox. It's one more task on their calendar. It's one more stressor, one more straw on the camel's back. Blame it on somebody else. It's easier for me to internalize it that way and move on. So even taking the time to pause and reflect on that. And I feel like that also ties into the curiosity piece that you were talking about, because sometimes the best way to bring out the curiosity of others is to slow the conversation down. And I don't
Mhm.
know how you've seen time impact conversations through your research, but I feel like anecdotally, the more people feel pressured by time, go faster, go faster, go faster. The more stressed they feel, the less heard they feel, the less connection they feel, ergo, the more conflict that they experience. And so if leaders could not necessarily spend more time with people, because we don't have it, everybody gets that. But if they could make those 5, 10, 15, 35, 60 minutes feel slower,
Yeah.
then they can increase the connection. They can draw out the curiosity. They can build the trust. They can do all of the things that you were talking about layered in. So even if they don't get the GOAT statement right, they can survive the mistake because of the environment they've created around the conversation.
Yes, 100%. And it feels like, so, people are like, we don't have time for that, but you don't have time not for that.
Thank
So,
you.
a curiosity statement could be, what's one thing that could derail this project? Now, if you stop and ask that and get people to say, I'm really deeply concerned about IT's bandwidth about to do this, or I don't think this is going to work in this customer segment, right? It is way better to know that today than 6 months from now when we're rolling out this project. And so it is you, and then having to do all of that rework. So the curiosity can really save time because you will improve the quality.
By leaps and bounds, I would imagine, for most leaders in most organizations. And the underpinning that I get from a lot of this, and I hope people are getting from it as well, is the importance of doing the work. When David first talked to me about the project, when you guys were doing the research, obviously I was really excited, was anticipating reading it. But then I started thinking about things that I feel like people ask folks for you and I, like in similar positions all the time. What's the one thing I should say? What's the one thing I should do? What's the one thing I should look for? There is no hack. There are these 300 phrases that will work. And there's these 12 goats that are going to have an even greater impact, and they'll have a wider range of applicability. But you talked about having trust, people who feel like you genuinely care and are interested in them, finding the common ground, understanding somebody else's perspective. So if we're not going into these relationships understanding that we're going to have at minimum one, likely many, difficult conversations with everybody we work and interact with, what are we doing now to make those conversations more successful when they happen? You talked about building the reputation and all of these other things that are important. So if somebody's listening to this thinking, oh, asking somebody what the outcome would be for them, that's an amazing question. I'm going to start using that. Well, it is an amazing question, and we should all already be using it. That's a fact. But if we're just expecting that to be a parachute for us every time,
Right.
it's not going to work. So all of these things that you've layered in are also super important to set up the opportunity to really get the most impact from these approaches.
Yeah, and I know you spend a lot of time teaching and thinking about intention. Like, what is the intention for conversations? And that is really, checking your own intentions. Do you really care about this person or this project, or are you doing something up for yourself? And not assuming that the other person has bad intentions. And that is, it was interesting. We have this client that we've been working with for 3 years now. We've trained every manager that they have, and get to do work at executive level. Like, so we know their organization very, very deeply. And I was talking to one of their very senior leaders Friday, and I said, "You look better." Like, his whole presence looked better, right? He looked calmer. He looked more confident. And I said, "What's going on?" I was curious, like, what's happening? He says, "Because my team is better." And I said, "What do you mean your team is better?" And he said, "They've started to assume positive intent from the people in the other departments." And he said, "So just that, if I think this person is not trying to screw us over, they're not trying to throw us under the bus, they're not trying to steal credit, they really want what I want." Now, they may be clumsy in the way they're communicating. They may have done something stupid that ticks us off. They may have they may have misinterpreted the data, but they didn't do it to screw us. And he's like, just that is making our lives so much less stressful.
Can
Yeah.
only imagine. That's such a great example. I feel like when we assume negative intent, which, let's be honest, is natural in many situations for many
Yeah.
people. So like, no judgment calling it out. Think about the stress that adds to us. Because if I'm assuming you're out to get me, Well, now I immediately get defensive. I'm trying to problem solve as to why. I'm trying to figure out how to protect myself, how still get what I want while probably not giving you what you want, like adding all these stressful layers and creating problems that don't exist, as opposed to just saying, well, Karen really should be focused on this from her priority.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think she wants to ruin my day. Let's work through it together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
All the difference in the world.
for sure.
You talked earlier in I think going all the way back to talking about our reputation and earning trust and encouraging people to open up to us. You talked about our own body language and our own delivery. And as a quick aside, I feel like success in most conversation scenarios can be boiled down to variable management. Like the more variables I have under control, the more successful I'm likely going to be. And body language is one of the most difficult variables to have under control for any number of reasons, from what happens automatically to perception to myths and the mind space that we're in when we enter into any conversation, all of these things. But when you look at, and you just gave an example, being in the field, working with one client in particular for 3 years, training their entire leadership team, and that's one example of many I know. From your research and your field work, what have you seen that was a terrible way to ask that question. And as somebody who asks questions, I should do a better job than that. So to circle back, let me come back and ask the question this way. When we are delivering messages in these conflicting conversations, we're trying to resolve conflict. We're not trying to be nice, but we're trying to create solutions together, potentially in a tense or elevated environment. What are the prominent concerns we should be addressing with our body language?
So the first one is your face. And it's the hardest one to do. And it is the hardest one for me to do. I do not have a poker face. And I keep thinking about, as we were writing this book, I kept thinking about this conflict that David and I had when we wrote our first book, fell in love, then merged our businesses together. And so we were both used to running our own shows, right? Our own client engagements. And we were doing one of our very first ones together. And by the way, it was my client, right? So, so just saying. So we get in, and David did something that it would just shocked. It just surprised me. It wasn't bad. That wasn't what I was going to do, and it wasn't what we had agreed on. And he didn't do it intentionally, right? It's just he was used to doing things in a different way, and we were clumsy. We were learning how to dance, and he took me outside of the room, and he said, I get that you're upset about the way I handled that. We'll talk about it. But the most important thing is you need to take that look off of your face. He said, because everybody can see it. And we are losing credibility because we're talking about building trust and you are looking at me with a bad face. And he was 100% right? And none of the words coming out of my mouth were negative. I was like looking like a team player, right? But the face was saying something completely different. And so I think and it's the hardest thing, but thank goodness it's a little easier now because you get to see your own face a lot on these virtual, right? So if this is something that, when somebody says something that ticks you off, you can look right into the Zoom or the Teams and say, what is my face doing with this? So I would say that's the first one. And then the other one is really like your tone of voice.
Yeah.
And I have found the biggest jujitsu move when people start to get louder and louder is I get softer and softer. And sometimes people worry, well, will I just get talked over? Not if you do it right. And if you can use silence, there's one thing that I really think we need to talk about here. And pause for a moment. So as I was like, wait for it. Right. And then so you are pulling in the attention. You will have a lot more credibility. And when you lower the intensity and the emotion of your voice, other people, it's just like a magnet. Everybody else's intensity comes down too.
I love that. A quote I stole years ago. If you're okay, they're okay.
I love that.
I believe that often the most unsettling person is the person who cannot be unsettled. And don't get me wrong, I can be easily unsettled. So it's something that I'm constantly trying to work on. But when everybody else is going nuts, if there's one calm person in the room, one person who's not raising their voice, who's thoughtfully pausing, everybody else has to come down to that level.
Mm-hmm,
And if
mm-hmm.
somebody's yelling at you and they care at all what you have to say, which on some level they do, or they wouldn't be in the room, on the phone, on the computer, whatever, they wouldn't be engaged with you at this point if they didn't. If we're talking quieter than them, eventually they have to shut their mouth to hear what we have to say.
Mm-hmm.
They just have to. So yeah, the tone matching the message, the face, and I've actually had problems on the other side. My face can be extremely expressive. So yes, I have that problem too. But as part of my interviewing background, I had to learn to hold the poker face, which unfortunately then became like Pavlov's dog, like just show no emotion. So now there's times where like I'm completely engaged with somebody, like nobody has listened more intently than I have ever listened at this point in time. But because I have no emotion on my face whatsoever, now my counterparts read on that can go in any number of directions. You're not listening, you're checked out, you're angry with me, you're talking to yourself, when in reality, none of those things are happening. Like I'm entirely immersed in this, but because it's not showing at all, it's having that reverse effect. So trying to find that, I mean, whether it's mirroring or matching, or at least showing some sort of emotion that goes with the moment is important. I would also be curious in your research if you found like even distance management, like the space that we keep. I know eye contact is going to vary a lot, person to person and situation to situation. But whether it's distance management or even, well, you already did talk about volume, but some other things that people might not think of besides just look open and happy.
Yeah. One thing that I worked at Verizon for 20 years, and as I grew, I had some pretty big teams. And so once you get to like you have 10,000 people on your team, it is hard to know everybody. So all you can manage is the individual interactions and showing up exactly how you want to show up when that you might have an opportunity, because you might not see this person again for another year. Right? And one of the biggest things that I found when people came into my office is I never sat behind the desk.
Thank you.
I just had two chairs in the other side of the room. And we went and we talked like two human beings having coffee, whether it was a performance management conversation, whether it was a celebration. But I wanted to just by physically walking around from my desk to say, this is different. I care about you. And this is a connected conversation. And, people will comment, they're like, nobody does that, but for me, that just, it's a visual representation that we are more at the same level in this conversation.
I'm going to find a way to clip that out and post it separately. I mean, it's that important not to sit behind your desk. I mean, how many people listening to this call today have said to somebody, come in, sit down, shut the door? Like, how many good things have ever happened after that? Especially if you're sitting behind your desk and behind your computer and looking at your phone, like you just tell them you're fired. Even if that's not what you intend to do, that's what they're feeling at this moment.
Mm-hmm.
Coming from behind the desk, showing them the attention, the focus, equal, all of those things, just the expectation violation. Well, this is different.
Mm-hmm.
But for me, above all else, one of the things that it doesn't surprise me at all here coming from you is when you talk about having a team of 10,000 people, it doesn't have to be 10,000. It could be 10. Yeah. Realizing that being in a leadership role in a lot of ways is like being a celebrity within the organization. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And that we might feel that this is one other conversation or one other meeting or one other thing or one other manager on our staff or employee, depending on our mindset that day. But for the people that pass us in the hall, or sit down next to us in the cafeteria, or come into our office, or join us in the conference room, that is their moment with us. Yeah. And to give them their moment makes all the difference in the world, and then makes all of these powerful phrases and difficult conversations and everything else we're talking about generally easier to navigate, because now they are more likely to assume positive intent. Now they are more likely to feel like they have a connection. And now that they are more likely to forgive our intentions as we go through our conversations. So just that alone is enormous.
See, now that's that. I want to clip that out and post that everywhere. It's because it's so important. And it was really hard for me to understand that, because I'm just Karin. And so I'm like, why am I intimidating to people? But your title alone, if there's several layers between you and someone else, you can show up so superhuman centered and really connected, but they're still scared. And so understanding that, and that you've got to actually go even deeper to be overly creating that psychological safety for people. It's not just assumed. It's not just because you're a nice guy doesn't mean that they think you're a nice guy. Right? It's intimidating.
The power that comes with the title, like and I know it's not where most leaders think, but you have the opportunity to make me miserable. You can
Yeah.
fire me. You can make me work with people I don't want to work with. You can take opportunities away from me. Like the list goes on and on and on. And whether people are thinking about that consciously or subconsciously, like that's where the fear comes from. If I mess up in front of one of my peers, it's embarrassing. They might make fun of me, might kind of lurk over my head for a little while, but it's with a peer. If I make a mistake in front of a superior, well, that could have legs and that could come back to haunt me for years to come. So it's such an important perception for leaders to have,
Yep.
which I think kind of leads into why it can be very hard for people to say no, especially to their bosses. Kind of tie that back
Yes.
into the perception that you were just talking about. And I know in your work, one of the things that you've done is explored opportunities for people to professionally, yet assertively, saying no in any given set of situations. So for people that might be listening to this saying, okay, I'm working on my car. Building cars is probably something else I should ask you about while we're here. But I'm building up my cars to have these conversations. What are ways that I should be able to say, or tools I can put in my belt to be able to say no to people, especially to people in positions of authority?
Yeah. So where to start is every time you are saying yes to something, you are saying no to something or someone else. And so, you can't possibly say yes to every opportunity. And so knowing about what is most important in the work that you're doing, in your relationships, in your life, that using that to ground your decisions about what you're going to say yes to and what you're going to say no to. I think that is the first place to start to get yourself. Because otherwise, we spend our whole days doing things that is not adding value or not things that we don't want to do. It is interesting because there are so many organizations who will read the book, and the one thing they want us to come teach their teams is, can you do a workshop on saying no? And a lot of times it'll be a manager or an executive saying, can you come teach my team how to say no to me?
Oh, wow.
Right? Because of that intimidation factor, that, maybe they will push back on a peer, but if a request comes from me, they drop everything and they do it. And then I'm like, why did you spend all your time working on this thing when this obviously new thing came up that you should have been working on? But they didn't have the courage to stop and take a step back and say, does this still matter? And so, the first thing is to say yes to say no. So you want to say yes to something. So maybe your boss comes to you and they say, "Oh, we've got this really neat, exciting new opportunity, and I want to put you on this special project. It is going to be great for your career. It's going to be great for exposure, and of course, it is going to be great because it is going to accomplish these outcomes." And you are looking at it and you go, "All those things are true." And there's no way. There is no way. I worked 70 hours last week on things that are really important. I don't see how anything is going to come off my desk. So first, say yes. Say yes to the idea. Wow. Thank you. That does seem like a really exciting project. And I can see the value that that is going to have for our organization. And thank you for thinking of me. You are absolutely right. That would be an amazing opportunity for me in my career. And we've been talking about this in our development plans that I do need to get exposure to these folks. And I agree with you. And here's the deal. I want to tell you what I got on my plate right now. And can we look at this? And do you see? I looking at this, and I don't see anything I can stop doing in the next 3 months to be order to make room for that. But am I wrong? Do you see anything? I do. What do you see here? And they're like, yeah, no. So I'm going to have to pass on this one, but say yes again, right? And I would love, let's keep this in mind and let's think about, because you're right. I'd love to be on something like this in the future. So let's think about how maybe we can as we're taking on new projects, make room for something like that, right? Now you've showed up like a critical thinker who cares about the business. You've said no, but you've flat out, you could have, an alternative universe, you could have just been like, are you crazy? I don't have time for that. No way, right? Same thing. You got the same outcome, but in one way you have showed up connected and starting with a yes.
I love it, which I probably need to come up with another phrase other than I love it, but everything about that. And your point at the end there is correct. You could have said, have you lost your mind? No, I'm crazy busy as it already is. And you want me to do that too? Like, on what planet is that even possible? And it might make you feel better to say it that way. But by addressing it from their priorities first, affirming their idea, all of those things, much better way to approach it. And I feel like there's an additional, not unintentional. There's an additional potential opportunity in there as well. I love what you said. Well, here's what everything I've already got on my plate for the next 3 months. And I don't really see the opportunity to walk away from any of this. If it means enough to the person who's giving you the idea, they have the opportunity to say, oh, good point. Why don't we put this on the back burner? Why don't we ask Johnny to help out with this? And who do you have on your team that you might be able to delegate that to? And if we made those 3 moves, now would you have the bandwidth to do it? So you're still allowing the potential of collaborative problem solving to take place, assuming it's something that you really did want to do and you meant all those nice things that you said about the idea. But you're allowing in this case, the leader to come back and say, oh, all good points. Hadn't thought about that. Let's see if we can shuffle the cards around on the table and make this work.
Yeah, it creates an opportunity for conversation. And that's what you're hoping for in these, right? So conflict in itself isn't inherently bad. Conflict means I think something, you see it differently, right? But in that, when we can come together, that's where creativity, innovation, problem solving comes, because those different perspectives are really good. David and I have conflict all day long, but have a happy marriage. But the reason is I am an idea person. I'm always running ahead, thinking of all the ways we could do all these exciting things, which is good. David is an operations person, figuring out how we're going to execute and maintain quality and make sure that we've got the systems and processes to support these ideas. In there is immediate conflict, because every time I come up with a new idea, he's immediately going, can we operationalize this in the time frame that she's thinking? And so one of the things that we've had to learn is how to have productive conversations about this. So for me, it's, I have an idea, and before we just listen, I've already thought about how we could operationalize it, and I don't think it's as overwhelming as you're going to think it is. And then he's learned to say, that's a great idea. Now, in order to make that happen, we would have to do da 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 da. And he just did this to me on Friday, and I'm like, yeah, you're right. Well, we have to wait on that one, right? But he didn't say no. He just said it was a positive. In order to make that happen, here's what we'd have to do. And now, so it's so that you have to kind of learn, the people that you're dealing with too, and what they need to feel seen and heard in a conflict.
And not everybody is working with their spouse. They don't have that 24/7 learning cycle and opportunity. But we do spend, for many of us, we spend more time with our coworkers than we do our spouses and our families. So we should be looking at these as, I don't mean to say it to impersonalize it or depersonalize it, because that's not what I mean, but they're data collection opportunities. Like, for each interaction that I have with people, how do they like to make decisions? How do they like to be approached? What seems to kind of set them off a little bit they don't like? What seems to work well? So now, as I'm building this database, I'm learning how to incrementally improve how I communicate with them over time to improve the relationship and to improve the outcomes, which gets back to intentions. But all so important to do. And I love it. It sounded like just a simple statement when you made it, create opportunities for conversations. But if we just stop thinking about saying yes or no, if we just stop thinking about saying, I do or don't want to do that, I do or don't agree with you, that is a good or bad idea, you're right or wrong, whatever these kind of binary responses that we've all been operationally conditioned to think and feel. And part of that is honestly how we make sense of the world and how we feel in it. So it's not right or wrong to think those things. But if we could just get past those immediate thoughts and do what you said, create the opportunity for conversation. If we can create the opportunity for conversation, what can we learn? And how can we use what we learn in order to update how we think and how we feel and what we want and the outcomes and relationships we can achieve, and then go execute. So even just that sentence might have seemed like well, all we're doing is creating the opportunity for conversations, but it's an enormous shift in thought process to go from stating what we think or feel to creating the opportunity to have conversations.
Yeah.
So with that, there comes a point where even when we've engaged in conversations, we might need an exit strategy.
Yeah.
Even the best intentions, we've tried the hardest. Maybe the person isn't going to play ball with us. Maybe there really isn't an opportunity. I think recently you had a conversation with Kwame Christian, who is
Ah,
he's awesome, but
yes, he is.
he's talked about, sometimes reaching an agreement is a bad thing. Like there's
Right.
times where no agreement is actually the best decision. So as you look back to your research, your experience, everything that you've put together, when it comes time to walk away, what are some tools people can use to professionally and gracefully exit some of these conversations, keeping the professional relationships intact?
Yeah. So the first question is, like, how do you know it's time to walk away? And, so is there an inherent values clash here? Like, is there something that this conflict is impacting your mental health? Are you showing up different? Do you like the person that you are, how you are showing up in this relationship, or are you starting to become somebody that you do not even recognize? And so and then I would ask, have I tried? Have I tried to have the conversation? Because a lot of times people will say, we're so far apart, I can't even have this conversation. And the first thing I would ask that person is, well, have you tried? Have you given that person the benefit of the doubt? Because a lot of times we don't. We just assume that it's time to walk away from the conflict. But then, even with that said, then really the courage then comes from what do you need to do to stay true to your values? So I tell this story in the book, and it was a very pivotal moment in my career. And sometimes there's difference where you can't speak up, and because there's a difference between courage and stupidity. So what the situation was that I had just my team had staged had been working aggressively for 2 years on a massive turnaround of our contact centers, our outsourced contact center partner relationships. And so results had gone from like really, really bad to really, really good. So the situation was I had my team and I had been working over the last 2 years on a complete turnaround of all of our relationships with our outsourced contact centers. So other people, other companies that were taking our calls. So you can imagine that's a very interesting dynamic. Now, results had completely transformed. These outsourced contact centers were on fire with great results. Some of them were completely outperforming our internal centers, which is really unheard of in this space. And so my boss calls, and now you got to love it when your boss calls and things are going good, right? So my boss calls and says, Karin, I think we should take my boss, so her boss, out to see some of this amazing work. And guess what? We get to take the corporate jet. Now, I am like super excited because this is going to be amazing recognition for these other companies that have worked so hard for us. It is going to be amazing recognition for my team who has been helping to make this happen. Plus, I get to be on the corporate jet, which is super fancy, right? So the day comes, and I get onto the jet, and there's a breakfast buffet, and it's all laid out. And there's fruit and hard-boiled eggs. And it's amazing. And we get on the plane, and then we land, and before we know it, there's a black car. It comes, picks us up on the tarmac, and it takes us to this outsourced contact center. We're in the conference room. They've got another breakfast buffet all laid out. And my boss's boss walks up to the breakfast buffet. She picks up one hard-boiled egg and goes, I must have salt. Now, there's no salt. So this is where it goes a little bit sideways because we're in the middle of nowhere. There's no cafeteria in this place. So there's this scramble and everybody starts running around the contact center, put the customer on hold. Do you have any salt? Right. So we find some salt. 20 minutes later, the operations review happens. And what I am expecting to be her just recognizing and celebrating is not what happens. Instead, she just launches into like fear and intimidation and all the things that we, in our last book, Courageous Culture, is called toxic courage crushing behaviors. And I am absolutely mortified because I have worked for last couple of years to really build trust and strategic partnership with these guys. So I am walking out, and again, my no poker face problem. My boss sees the anger on my face and she says, Karin, if you care about your career, you're not going to say a word. Now, there's a difference between courage and stupidity, right? So I didn't say a word in that moment, but I took my laptop to the back of the plane. I opened it up and I started writing every single thing I believed about human-centered leadership and why it mattered. And then on the way home, I called everybody and apologized for that behavior. And I said, we're not gonna ever act that way. And then that Sunday, I started my Let's Grow Leaders blog, all about human-centered leadership. Well, turns out that a lot of people wanted to hear about human-centered leadership. And so that blog started showing up on the best of list. People started calling, when are you going to be our keynote speaker? When are you going to write your book? Can you do this for our company? And I'm like, no, I have this job. I'm like, oh, maybe I can. So I didn't say a word in that moment to that person because it would not have helped. But I did speak up. And that experience led me now to do the vital work that I'm doing all over the world because I did find my voice. So sometimes it's not, can I say this thing in this moment, but is there an alternative place that you can say what needs to be said? So that's, a lot of times I think we think, well, I just have to take it. But how do you stand up for yourself and maintain the integrity of what you really care about?
Congratulations. Now hearing your genesis story of how you got there, it's pretty cool to hear. And I appreciate you sharing such a personal story with everybody. But with that, though, again, one little line that you said in there that I think is so powerful, it wouldn't have helped. And I feel like if people could just, before they open their mouth, think, or before they hit the keyboard or whatever it is, if they could just stop and think, how will this help?
Yeah.
And if the answer is it'll make me feel better, well, that'll help you now.
Mm-hmm.
But is it going to help you mid to long term? And is it going to help everybody else? So again, the little linchpin to that whole fantastic example, will it help? I know we're pushing time. I'd love to ask you just one more question, if I could. Is you talked about not saying anything in the moment, but finding your voice. And people sometimes feel like they just have to take it. I feel like early in my career, one of several very unhelpful pieces of advice I got that were well intentioned was just take the high road.
Mm.
And I feel like that concept of just taking the high road, there's times to do it, as long as I think as you know where the off ramp is, there's times to do it. But if you could just let us know your thoughts on just taking the high road and potentially better alternatives to taking the high road, I would be grateful.
That is nobody's ever asked that question, and I'm going to have to think about this one, maybe write a blog post on it. But, I think that if you take it depends what the high road is, right? Are you staying in, do you like who you're showing up in this conflict? And if somebody's screaming at you and shouting F-bombs, taking the high road means not screaming at them and shouting F-bombs back, right? Because you are a classy human being and you want to maintain being a classy human being in that situation. So I think that's an example of when you should take the high road, right? Because imagine somebody videoed what was happening there and all they're seeing is your behavior, right? But if taking the high road means that you are going to be taken advantage of or that people are going to, ask you to do things that feel out of integrity for you, but you're taking that. That's the challenge. I think that's the challenge because you do not want to be the victim in a circumstance. And sometimes it's a combination. Last week, we had a situation where we were in a massive strategic partnership to build an amazing program in Europe. And we basically the person just stopped. I mean, we put hours and hours and hours and hours of work into this. We built an assessment. We've done this stuff. And she's like, oh, I got a new job. I'm not going to do it. I turned away multiple keynotes, right? Like, but it was like, this is not a small, oh, we just decided not to do this thing. The downward. So here's the, like, how did I take, what do I do there? Because I could have just said, okay, that could have been just taking the high road. But I also thought, well, what's at the other side of this? Because this person has just shown me who they are. And for me to say, well, is there another way we can do this? Do you think we can still, I trust this person at this point, right? Because if she's willing to just say like, oh, we're just done, then continuing to pursue any partnership with her, when people tell you who they are, believe them. So what I did with that, and this is my version of taking the middle road, is I didn't just turn over and say, oh, okay, no problem. But I wrote her a very carefully crafted email, and I said, this is the impact that this decision is having on our business. I want you to understand the downstream impacts on this. And by the way, you clearly had information that you were pursuing this other opportunity way, way before. This did not just fall out of the sky. And it feels out of integrity for me for that you did not let us know what was going on while we continue to do this work. I wrote it. I slept on it. I showed it to David. He read it, right? So it was a very carefully, but at least I got to say what I believed, and I got that. So I feel somewhat better. She didn't respond, which is another sign that I should not be in partnership with her. But at least, so, that's like the middle road. So sometimes you have to say, for me to have, if I had just let it go, sometimes letting it go is really just shoving it down. Like, so I needed to have some level of closure on that.
I like that. Letting it go is just shoving it down. I don't like that it happened, but I like the way that you said it. I think that's another kind of one of those, I've never thought about it that way. I'm not really just letting it go. I'm going to put it somewhere. I'm going to pile some other stuff with it. And eventually it's going to come out.
It's all going to come out, right? Other. Yeah.
I like how you illustrated taking the middle road as well. I can't thank you enough for another very educational conversation. I really appreciate all that you shared today, especially with everything else going on. Thank you so much for taking the time. I have no doubt that there are plenty of people listening right now saying, I need more of that. So for everybody that wants to connect with you and learn more from you, where do they need to go?
Great. Thanks so much. It's been absolutely my pleasure. The book is called Powerful Phrases for Dealing with Workplace Conflict: What to Say Next to De-Stress the Workday, Build Collaboration, and Calm Difficult Customers. There is an entire companion guide that goes with it that is for free. So that has role plays and all kinds of build your own goats and conflict cocktails. And so if you get the book, make sure you download the extra resources. It's really easy to do. And then from there, our company is called Let's Grow Leaders. And I would love to connect with you on LinkedIn also. I'm Karin with an I, Karin Hurt.
And you post prolifically on LinkedIn. So
I try.
Constantly sharing blogs and videos and ideas. And so it's great for me to see as well. Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure to speak with you and David both, and to continue to learn so much from your work and your research. I really appreciate it. I look forward to continuing to follow you and continuing to learn from you. And again, I can't thank you enough for sharing your time today. Thank you so very much.
My pleasure. Thank you so much. And thanks for all you do to encourage courage.
Thank you. We'll talk to you soon. Karin, thank you so much for an amazing conversation. I'm thrilled we finally had the chance to talk. I took a page full of notes. Thank you so much for all you shared, from your research, from your experience, from all the different stops in your career, even your relationship with David. It was so great to hear. Thank you so much for all of it. And you said so many powerful things. One of the early topics that I thought was really important to stop and consider, how trying to be nice actually creates conflict. That might sound counterintuitive, but if we're trying to be too nice, we're not addressing the things that need to be addressed, and conflict assumes. It's been said before, but it needs to continue to be said: assume positive intent. The more we assume positive intent, the more we'll be able to avoid conflict and create stronger outcomes. Your concept for saying yes to say no was fantastic. And I also love the line that you said sort of in passing, which was, when people show you who they are, believe them. So much great information packed into one conversation, Karin. Thank you very, very much. And of course, thank you to everybody who took the time to listen to the conversation. I hope you took as many notes as I did and enjoyed the conversation as much as I did as well. Karin is absolutely a wealth of knowledge and experience. Before we go, let's thank our sponsors one more time, HumanTell. Head over to humantell.com. Enter the code Inquasive25 for 25% off of their best-in-class online training so you can begin to learn how to identify what people are likely thinking and feeling in real time by capturing their changing facial expressions and nonverbal behavior. It is all backed by science, which is all there for you to read on their website as well. I've done it myself. Enter the code Inquasive25. I vouch for it. I highly recommend it. Please head over to certifiedinterviewer.com if you're a professional interviewer. That's where you can get all your questions answered for the International Association of Interviewers. The individual and group benefits for joining, the online and in-person training that's available, the educational benefits, the resources that are available, the networking opportunities, and so much more. That is also where you can get the most up-to-date information on the Certified Forensic Interviewer designation. What does it take to qualify for, obtain, and maintain the designation? What is entailed, the research behind it, the career applications, all of that and more will be answered for you over at certifiedinterviewer.com. And finally, while you're online, please head over to inquasive.com. That's where you can learn more about the programs our clients ask us to customize for their senior leaders, their sales teams, their HR teams, and more to teach them how to apply the strategic observation and persuasive communication techniques necessary to encourage people to share their everyday confessions, the information that they're worried about sharing because it might have some consequences associated to it, real or perceived, and then unlock the rewards, the outcomes, the relationships by approaching the conversations that way. We appreciate all of you being here for another episode. Thank you so much. We look forward to seeing you again next week. Please, before you go, like the show, share the show, forward it to somebody else, subscribe to the show on your preferred platform, and leave us your feedback. What would you like to hear more of so we can have it for you? Thank you all so much for being here. Stay safe, take care of each other, and we'll see you next time.